This week on Quality Digest Live, we chat with Joe DeFeo of Juran Global about the 7th edition of Juran's Quality Handbook.
Plus, considering the value of handheld XRF analyzers. That and more when we come back.
Hey, Christopher, give me a status update.
Welcome back to Quality Digest Live for December 2nd, 2016. QDL is your weekly look at who and what is making the news in the world of quality. I'm Mike Richmond, publisher of Quality Digest.
And I'm Quality Digest Editor-in-Chief, Dirk Ducharme. And I am what you call a remote employee, a telecommuter.
Yep, that's one of the things you are.
It's one of the, I'm several things.
You're a champion eater, for instance.
Depending who you talk to.
I've heard you're a great snorer.
There we go. Business trips, you gotta love them.
That's right.
Well, if you've never been a remote employee, let me tell you that it isn't as much fun as you might think.
No.
You kind of work in a bubble, in a sense.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, you're off by yourself, and that has a lot of minuses, and mainly the biggest minus is that you are isolated from what is going on in the main office. On several levels, not just on a personal interaction level, but also kind of on what's going on level.
There's the little things that happen between the hallways, the water cooler talk, as they say, that really are important things that you miss out when you're not
that you
there.
miss out on, and that's kind of critical. And the thing is that managers who manage remote employees have to keep all that stuff that we just mentioned, have to really keep all that stuff in mind. And it takes some extra effort on the manager side to truly treat your remote employees the same as you treat your in-house employees. And there was an article in Executive Street, 6 tips to keep remote employees engaged, which provides some, I think, some really useful information on how to do that. And I'm just going to run through just a few of them here. First of all, you need to develop a system for keeping everyone in the loop. You need to remember that your remote employees aren't privy to all that informal information that you were just talking about, the water cooler talk, or even just chatting over the top of the cubicle, right? A lot of really good information is communicated that way. And so you have to work at building that communication. You can use something like Google Drive or another cloud application that allows you to kind of collaborate over the cloud. That way you can have online documents and spreadsheets that will allow managers and coworkers to see where anyone, including remote employees, where they are in a project or other things. I mean, it could even be just, hey, I'm stepping out for a little bit or whatever. There's just all sorts of electronic communication that helps keep everybody in the loop. Not just remote employees telling the bosses what they're doing, but also the boss and the other coworkers saying what they're doing and keep you apprised. The other thing you can do is have weekly meetings. We do this here at Quality Digest, and sometimes we use Skype, sometimes we use Google Hangouts, but a video chat is really easy to do nowadays. But if you can't do that for whatever reason, just a plain old conference call, which ropes in everybody, your local people and your remote people, again, to keep them apprised of what the status is on various projects. You need to keep your employees accountable. They may be remote, but they still have to meet the same deadlines as everyone else. And what method you use to track this depends on your situation, but you do need a way to make sure that your remote workers are doing the job that you expect of them. On the flip side of that, when it comes to things like incentives and bonuses, out of sight too often means out of mind. You need to give the same opportunities to the employees you don't see as the ones that you do see. It's easy to lose track of what your remote employees are doing, and easy to keep them away, accidentally of course, from the same benefits seen by your in-house employees. So it's just a few thoughts, but I mean the main bit on this is obviously it comes down to communication. And we have a lot of tools nowadays for remote employees where this communication, it is possible to keep them in the loop much better than we have in the past when your remote employees were available maybe just by email.
Right.
And now you really can get somewhat of a real-time aspect to it, and keep them more involved, keep them more apprised of what's going on, and you apprised of what they're doing at the same time. So,
yeah, well, we've had remote employees here for a decade or so.
Yeah, exactly.
At this point. And we've worked through a lot of these issues. And Google Drive is our friend. I mean, we've really learned a lot.
And Google Hangouts.
Google Hangouts. I mean,
Skype.
Google's a really amazing company. They really understand. They get the whole work collaboration deal, the remote collaboration deal, and they do a good job of that. And we've used those tools, but we've also just discovered them ourselves, included them together. So, if you have remote employees, what Dirk just mentioned and what's in that article is good to remember. But also, be creative, find your own solutions and ways to work together better, because it's important to keep those people in the loop. All right. Thanks, Dirk. All right. Well, one of the great things about the quality industry, I think, is the way in which the current generation builds upon the work of our past leaders. And this can be seen quite clearly in this right here, which is the 7th edition, if I have it right, yes, there it is, the 7th edition of a classic work within our field, Juran's Quality Handbook, the complete guide to performance excellence. This book, which was released last month, is edited by Joseph DeFeo, who's going to be joining us here in a moment. The first edition,
this is an old book. I mean, the original.
That's just what I was going to say. The first edition of this text goes back to 1951, and it helped establish in no small measure Juran's reputation as really one of the great gurus in the quality space. And in this book, he first reveals the power of the Juran trilogy, it's called, which is a cross-functional management technique that ties together quality planning, quality control, and quality management, all of which continually feed back into one another for the overall benefit of the organization. And this, of course, is the newest edition of the handbook. It contains a lot of Juran's original and timeless thinking on the topic of quality, along with new and or updated material covering risk and methodologies like Six Sigma and Lean, and ISO standards. So now to join us to chat about this new edition of the Quality Handbook, among other topics, is Joe DeFeo, who, in addition to editing the book, is also the CEO of Juran Global. So Joe, welcome back to Quality Digest Live.
Thank you, guys, and happy holidays.
Happy holidays to you. Nice festive red shirt there. Thank you for
nice shirt.
Thank you for that.
I thought I would try a little bit of color instead of the old boring blue and whites.
That's right. Well, thanks, Joe. All right. Well, let's start off with your opinion about something. So, why, in your opinion, is now a good time to bring forth this latest edition of Juran's Quality Handbook?
Well, historically, it published about every 10 years, and in that 10-year period, it was enough time to offer something valuable and something new. When my first edition was the third, I participated in the 4th, 5th, 6th, and 7th, and each one, the change that was going on in our subject matter was happening faster and faster. So when we completed the last one, McGraw-Hill, our publisher, said, I told them, I said, I'm only going to do it if we can publish something faster. And they were very happy about that. So we tried to get it out in 6 or 7 years. Keep in mind, today, a book like that is kind of hard to come by because who wants 1,000 pages? But what we find is that some people do want to keep that 1,000 pages, have everything in their hands. And so we continued it, and we have something new to offer, and we'll keep continuing it.
And Joe, I mean, I gotta think that it must have been pretty humbling, to go through the work of really this great man. I mean, Joseph Juran, and he was your mentor, and you've gone through and you've updated it for today's class of quality leaders. I mean, what did that feel like to have that responsibility?
Well, no one would argue whatever Dr. Juran wrote down, but everybody would argue what everybody else wrote. So one is getting criticized from him, making sure you write like him, or now trying to write like him without him, helping you along, is not too easy. So what you try to do is not be him, but try to live up to his principles, and that is try to be as factual as you can, try not to think of everything yourself, include as many experts as you can, and sometimes you end up with a gem. And I hope we can continue with those gems along the way. And our subject matter keeps changing and evolving. We haven't had 100 years to practice this stuff, so it's also hard to identify what's most important to the reader today in one book versus what they can find in 1,000 other sources online.
Joe, I mentioned Juran's Quality Trilogy, which really was a breakthrough idea when it first was introduced by Dr. Juran several decades ago. And this is an idea that's really still very, very relevant. So why do you think that this concept really remains such a foundational part of organizations' quality?
My belief is that, Dr. Juran was very pragmatic. He didn't sit down and pen this trilogy thing. He was working within quality control, and he realized that inspecting items and controlling processes were only as good as the design of those products and services. And so he started to monitor and watch what was happening on the design side. And he found some fascinating things that once a product is introduced into operations, the designers move on to the next iteration. So his first opportunity to improve what came out of control of goods was the improvement of goods. And by trying to understand what causes defects and what causes deficiencies, he was able to then go back to the designers and say, fix these. So initially, he was in the world of quality control, and that's the way it was. But he realized that you couldn't do total control without improvement, and you couldn't improve everything to the level of perfection without design. So he had two publications, one that articulated in 1954 with Managerial Breakthrough, that if you think about quality of control and quality of improvement, you'll get far. And then by the time the 80s came along, and I believe it was around 1986, he published that paper and said, no, there's actually three elements to managing, and that is control, improvement, and design or planning. And as a result, he created that term, the Juran Trilogy. And my belief is that one reason that it's popular, it's easy to get your arms around if you're a leader, because the big question is, if you get the fact that you want to be a well-performing, high-performing organization, you want the best goods and services, how do you do it? Well, you don't do it just because you take a lean course or a Six Sigma course or get a quality engineer. You do it by understanding the customer requirements and designing the features in. You design operational capabilities in so that you can produce or deliver the goods and service. Then you control it at the least amount of pain, and then you continuously improve it. So it just became a natural management process that you design, you control, and you improve. And he even went so far later in life to saying, my intention, it wasn't supposed to be quality planning, quality control, and quality improvement, but it really is about business planning, business control, and business improvement. And it can apply to itself. You can improve the trilogy by truly understanding how to implement a quality management system better by designing it better, how to manage it over time better by controlling it. So it kind of kept evolving, and I think that's why it stays where it is today, because it's easy to get your arms around it.
Well, it's well said, and I think it represents kind of why that is so timeless, and that's exactly right. The problems that managers had then and the problems that they're having now are very similar, but the world is itself is very different now than it was when the handbook first came out. It's like 7 decades ago almost now. So how does one apply the lessons of Juran in an era that includes things like big data or international supply chains or automation?
Yeah, so the first thing is that there's no prescription. So the one thing that folks need to realize is that you're not going to find a prescription that says, if you're in a pharmaceutical company, do this. If you're manufacturing, do this. If you're financial, do this. Or if you're healthcare, do this. It says, how can you, if you want to have a strategy based on high customer performing products and services, this is what you can do. You can design better, you can control better, you can improve better. In order to do that, you should have a good strategy based on customers and excellence. In order to do that, you need leadership. In order to do that, you need et cetera, et cetera. So what the book contains is a set of what Juran called compendium of knowledge that you could use to build your own system, because everybody's at a different place. And let's face it, it was a manufacturing-driven methodology which migrated into non-manufacturing, and now it really just exists in the world of data. So the real heart of a quality management system or a good business management system is getting good information to make good business decisions on. Well, good information comes from good data. And good data is just what that means, good data. So whether you have 10 data points, 20 data points, or a billion data points a second, you need to interpret that data. Historically, we were able to count 25 data points and be able to determine its controllability. Today, when you're getting a billion data points in split seconds, which 25 data points do you count? So one, the methodologies are not data exclusive, But in today's big data world, which we try to discuss in here, is that you really have to understand what you're trying to solve and what piece of that data is going to help you do it. And what it's really getting down to is, measurement system capability, how you sample, what you sample, is becoming more and more important. So we try to put our emphasis better on more on measurement system capability. If you think of the U.S. election recently, one could theorize, why were the polls off? Well, a lot of the polls are not all conducted with big data thinking in mind. They've been based on small data thinking. And so I wonder how many errors were made by interpreting a population with so few people. And so in the handbook, we treat data as all data, but we also treat big data, which means a lot of data coming at you fast it has to be interpreted properly. Let me give you one anecdote. I left the healthcare improvement section out of the handbook this time because healthcare is just so different, but yet the same. But it needs its own language, so we're going to be doing a healthcare quality book. And ASQ already had one anyway, and there's a lot of folks having them. But I was sitting in a research meeting once, and it may sound horrible, but they were looking at data coming from bacteria that's in our intestines. And the question was, where in our intestines do they get the sample, and will that sample be representative? Because every inch of our intestines could be something different. And that's how you have to think about your population. 25 data points coming from every foot of an intestine may not be the same representative sample of every inch. So really interpreting the data gets you to understanding measurement system capability and really gets you to knowing what information you want.
Well, Joe,
my big fear is everybody wants to interpret all the big data as big data instead of really digging into what you really need and mine that data properly.
Well, Joe, I think that's a good place to leave it right there. I wanted to remind everybody the book is out now. This is, of course, the Juran Quality Handbook, edition 7 from McGraw-Hill. Joe, thanks for joining us today, giving us a little perspective on Dr. Juran's legacy. And we encourage everyone out there to check out the book. And Joe, thanks again for joining us today on
Thanks,
Quality
guys.
Digest
I
Live.
appreciate your opportunity.
Hey, talk to you soon, Joe. Thanks. Bye.
Bye.
All right, good book there. Always like doing a quick book review there. Good stuff there. That's
classic.
Quite a book.
Classic.
It's a classic in the industry. All right, well, another classic is one of the most important principles of quality improvement initiatives is visuality. We know that. We talk about it all the time. And humans are vision-centric creatures. And for many of us, a good graphic can communicate a lot faster and more effectively than anything else. A picture's worth 1,000 words. We know that, right? Yep. Well, perhaps the biggest proponent of visuality in our industry today is a lady by the name of Gwendolyn Galsworth. Many of you are familiar with Gwendolyn. She's a good friend of Quality Digest for many years. She founded the Visual Lean Institute and hosts a radio program called The Visual Workplace, which has 70,000 listeners. Impressive. Gwendolyn's latest article, Napoleon's Defeat Made Visual, right there, ran in Quality Digest Daily on Tuesday. And in it, she shares a graphic that illustrates at a glance the truly disastrous depths, we know this, of the defeat that Napoleon Bonaparte and his French army suffered during the invasion of Russia in 1812. Well, you ask, well, what does that have to do with visuality? Well, let's see, because we're going to show you the image right now, and we can kind of see, I think, what we're talking about. There's the image that she's talking about. And without even really being able to read the words, which are in French, you can see this chart, which shows the relative size of Napoleon's army when it left France in the summer of 1812, and that's the kind of the thick golden shape at the left there, combined with a handful of men that straggled back out of Russia that winter, which is the pitifully thin black line below it. You can see they went out in gold, yep, and they came back in black.
Yeah, the width of the line represents
the number of men in the army.
Troops,
right?
Yeah, okay.
And you can see the army deteriorate mile by mile as they advanced to and then retreated from Moscow. And there's also at the bottom, you can't really see it, but at the bottom there's a corresponding graph which shows the plummeting temperatures in that long retreat reached a low of about 30 below 0 Fahrenheit near the end of the campaign in December. Well, I mean, obviously you see being attacked and having 30 below temperatures, you can see what happens to an army. It disintegrates.
They started off with almost
422,000 men, came back with about 5,000 men. That's right. The creator of this map was a civil engineer by the name of Charles Joseph Minard, and he was one of the foremost cartographers and information designers of all time. This particular map, one of the dozens he created, was referred to as the best statistical graphic ever drawn.
Amazing. Yeah.
I would tend to agree with that.
Dr. Wheeler's got it hanging on his wall.
Got it hanging on his wall, Dr. Wheeler. I mean, it really represents and illustrates the events and processes that are powerful. I mean, they're powerful things. In this case, of course, it was powerful for Napoleon's army in a negative sense. Organizations can take the inherent truth and use it to really help their improvement activities. I think when people can tell at a glance the status of, like, say, shipments or machine downtime or customer satisfaction or any other number of other key metrics, the processes affecting those outputs tend to improve.
Sure.
I mean, that makes a lot of sense. Visuality equals understanding, as Gwendolyn Galsworth and Charles Joseph Menard would certainly agree. Napoleon Bonaparte, maybe not so much. I don't know if you would agree with that. As he saw his army disintegrate and saw it on the Menard map. But,
by the way, you mentioned Charles Joseph Menard. If you want to see a lot more of his maps, if you just Google Mondays with Menard, that'll take you to I think it's called cartographica.com. It's a cartography site. And Mondays with Menard was a series they put out, I think 5-6 years ago, which highlights about maybe a dozen or so of his maps. So not just Napoleon's map, but several others, and they're all beautiful maps and extremely information laden, but more important, easy to read.
Visual.
And that's the thing. A lot of information is no good if it's difficult to decipher.
That's
and
right.
that was where he was a genius.
A genius at a glance. That's right.
All right. Well, switching gears here a little bit, manufacturers try to tightly control the raw materials that they get from their suppliers. And, if you allow non-conforming material into your production, it could potentially halt your production line, and that's going to be a waste of time and money. Worse, if you are required to maintain, let's say, RoHS or other hazardous material standards, getting the wrong material or the wrong mix of material could put you in some serious legal problems. So the question is, when it comes to raw materials, particularly metals, or even completed sub-assemblies made of mixed materials, how do you really know the makeup of the materials that you receive? And are they what you expected, or are they what is allowed, or the quantities allowed by law? Well, there is a device called an XRF, or X-ray fluorescence analyzer, that allows you to directly read the type and amount of particular metals in a sample. So here on the show with us today to explain a bit about XRF analyzers is Diane Hillhouse of Olympus. Hi, Diane.
Hi there. How are you?
Fine, thank you. Thanks for joining us. So just briefly, for those of our viewers who don't know, can you describe what an XRF analyzer is?
Sure, absolutely. Like you mentioned, XRF stands for X-ray fluorescence, and an XRF analyzer is a very handy and powerful tool used to determine material chemistry rapidly and non-destructively. And here's what one looks like.
Oh, there we go.
Okay. Oh, did I cut out? Should I start again?
No, you got it. We got it. Yep.
Okay. So this is what one looks like. Some people say it looks like a radar gun or a Star Trek phaser. And the way it works is the analyzer uses very low-level X-rays to energize or excite a sample, and then it's enough energy so that the sample itself emits its own signature characteristic X-rays. And then the analyzer takes those signature X-rays and determines what elements or elements in the elements in the periodic table, the sample contains, and then also a concentration of those elements. And a handheld XRF analyzer can generate a chemistry in metals and alloys, in plastic, like you mentioned earlier, the hazardous substances, the RoHS regulations, as well as glass, soils, sediments, rocks, liquids, pretty much anything where there's an elemental concentration that the analyzer can recognize.
And Diane, how are they typically used in industry? How would a typical manufacturer use an XRF analyzer, and why would they?
So the most common use is to sort and identify metals and alloys, and they're using it for quality control, for product reliability, for product safety. Handheld XRF, it's very commonly used and widely accepted to verify incoming material and then outgoing finished product in a manufacturing or fabrication setting. And then there'll be a handheld XRF analyzer ready to greet those same finished products at the door of a warehouse of an oil refinery or a petrochemical plant or a pharmaceutical plant or a power plant. And they will use that handheld XRF analyzer to again, take a look at the material once it arrives. They'll take a look at it prior to installing it in whatever process or unit they plan to use it in. They'll continue to use a handheld XRF analyzer to take a look at these same parts and components during the lifetime of this unit or process that they're installed in. And then once those parts and components are ready to be decommissioned and recycled, you'll find a handheld XRF analyzer in those scrap recycling facilities where they're sorting that scrap, getting it ready to send it on to a mill or a foundry to be made into new metal. And then those foundries and mills will also have handheld XRF analyzers. They're going to check that incoming material one more time. They'll use a handheld XRF analyzer throughout their process to make sure that the chemistry stays very tight on this new metal.
So you use it all over the place.
Absolutely, all through new metal manufacturing, product fabrication, in service, in use.
Now you showed us, you just showed us, and you've referred to it several times, a handheld unit. And it sounds like the function that you're describing is really important, but in the past, how was this type of analysis done, or was it? Is this something that's just, now that it's handheld, we can do things that we couldn't even do in the past?
Well, X-ray fluorescence itself, it's a classic technology. It's been around for a long time. It's first commercially available in the 1950s. But prior to that, and even now, you'll hear people talk about really simple and inexpensive techniques to tell the difference between metals and alloys. You might hear somebody talking about grinding a metal and taking a look at the color of the sparks, or you might hear someone talk about eddy current technology, or maybe something as simple as using a magnet to tell the difference between ferrous and non-ferrous material. I have folks tell me they can taste the metal and tell the difference. And actually, these are all pretty valid techniques, but as long as you don't want to sort alloys very specifically. Today, I mean, there are thousands and thousands of alloys and really infinite possibilities of modifying these existing alloys. So, it's hard to tell the difference between these alloys that look very similar and have very similar chemistries without understanding, understanding what elements are in there and what concentrations. So you really have to have something like a handheld XRF to do this.
Diane, handheld X-ray might sound maybe scary to some people. I mean, it's X-rays, right? I mean, so what kind of radiation levels are we talking about here? Are there any special precautions that folks need to take when they use these analyzers?
Well, most states and regulatory bodies, they're going to require the proper training, which Olympus and any other manufacturer is going to give the customer. So again, they're widely used, they're widely accepted, but I understand that X-rays and radiation do sound scary. Now you're actually getting more radiation from your everyday activities, such as standing out in the sun or flying on an airplane, than you would ever get from a handheld XRF analyzer. The X-rays and the radiation are measured in a unit called millirems, and our governing bodies and regulatory bodies that are there to keep us safe, they give folks who use radiation equipment an allowance of 50,000 millirems per year. And that includes people who use handheld XRF analyzers. It includes people who are doing industrial radiography or using medical X-ray devices as well. And a handheld XRF analyzer, it produces about 0.1 millirems per hour with proper usage. And so if you're given this figure, you could use a handheld XRF analyzer all day long, every day of the year, except for weekends and holidays, and you would still be under 1% of that 50,000.
Probably certainly safer than tasting lead or cadmium.
Yes, I was going to say.
I'm not sure I want to go around licking cadmium all day long. It's a good idea.
Yeah.
I mentioned, and you did RoHS, the reduction of hazardous material standard, which limits the amount of certain heavy metals in particular in products. Would this same type of instrument be used by, big box stores, for instance, for checking the hazardous materials in consumer goods? I'm thinking, in particular, several years ago there was, lead in certain, toy imports and that sort of stuff. Would these kind of companies use it?
Yeah, absolutely. These finished products, you have whether they're made in the United States or elsewhere, when they're imported in or exported, they're going to be checked. And then prior to them being sold in the stores, you do have folks testing these products as well. I mean, obviously, you don't want to be distributing products that might poison somebody or make somebody sick, but there's also a lot of legal liability as well.
Okay. Well, Diane Hillhouse from Olympus, thanks for joining us today. And be sure to join myself and Diane for the live webinar that Diane is presenting next week, Prevent Alloy Mix-Ups and Take Control of Your Supply Chain. That's taking place live right here from our studio in Chico, California, this coming Tuesday, December 6th at 2 p.m. Eastern, 11 a.m. Pacific. Diane will show and discuss everything that she just talked about, but as well she's going to show the features and functionalities of a particular handheld XRF, the Vanta XRF from Olympus. So be sure to join us for that webinar, and it should be interesting. A nice little techie webinar.
Yep. Keep an eye on your inbox.
Yep. Thanks, Diane.
Thank you so much.
Thanks,
See you next
Dan.
week.
We'll see you on Tuesday.
All right.
All right. Well, we have a tweet of the week to close the show for you today, and this one represents some real economic wisdom, I'd say. It comes to us from the Twitter account for the Auto Trading Organization and quotes the Oracle of Omaha, Warren Buffett himself, who said, "Price is what you pay, value is what you get." I like that
I
one.
like that.
Those are important words to remember for any of us who sell stuff for a living.
You sell stuff for a living.
That's right. Not to mention any of us who buy stuff every day, right? I mean, you want to find value, right? So that's important words to remember. Yeah. So for more great tweets on standards, methodology, quality, methodologies, and other high-value content, see what I did there? Yeah, you can check us out on Twitter at Quality Digest.
All right, well, that is it for today's show. Thanks to Joe DeFeo and Diane Hillhouse for joining us on today's show. Speaking of Diane, remember, be sure to join us for that live webinar that she's presenting, Prevent Alloy Mix-Ups and Take Control of Your Supply Chain. The event takes place live right here from our studio this coming Tuesday, December 6th at 2 p.m. Eastern, 11 a.m. Pacific. Learn the features and functionalities of handheld XRF analyzers and the Vanta XRF from Olympus in particular.
That's right.
You all have a great weekend, and we'll see you next week.
See ya. Bye. It was weird.